During the early 1950s, almost nothing was more debated than civil rights. One of the most controversial issues was segregation between black and white schools under the principle of separate but equal.
Despite this principle, the schools were not like this at all. Many black schools were overcrowded, lacked running water and functional electricity, and didn't have common facilities like a cafeteria, gym, or library.
Also, they received only about half as much as per student funding than white schools did, meaning white schools were exponentially nicer than black ones. White schools also had better teachers, meaning that white children gained more educational options than blacks did, meaning that whites received more job opportunities than blacks.
Thus being said, the segregation of schools needed to take place, as this unfair treatment had been going on for far too long. When Oliver Brown tried to sue the school board of Topeka, the United States would change for the better.
The Brown versus the Board of Education cases were incredibly impactful and controversial, shattering the divide between white and black educational segregation.
These cases were consolidated under Brown v. Board of Education. The 5 cases were filed in Kansas, South Carolina, Virginia, the District of Columbia, and Delaware. The first case I'll listed was Briggs v. Elliott. This case originated in 1950 in Clarendon County, South Carolina. This started when the president of Clarendon County School Board, R.W. Elliott, invaded their right of equal protection under the 14th Amendment by upholding the county's segregated education law. Briggs features social science testimony on behalf of the complainants from some of the nation's leading child psychologists, like Dr. Kenneth Clark, whose famous study, named the Doll Test, concluded that segregation negatively affected the self-esteem and psyche of black children. The Briggs was argued at the district and federal court levels by Thurgood Marshall, the noted NAACP attorney and future Supreme Court justice. The U.S. District Court's 3-judge panel ruled against the plaintiffs, with one judge diverging and stating that separate but equal schools were not in violation of the 14th Amendment. Judge Wade's Waring presented some arguments that would be then used in the Brown v. Board of Education case. This case was soon appealed to the Supreme Court.
Marshall also argued the Davis v. County School Board of Prince Edward County, Virginia case at federal level. This case was originally filed in May 1951 by Spotsman Robinson and Oliver Hill, plaintiffs' attorneys. The Davis case argued that Virginia's segregated schools were unconstitutional because they violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Virginia's 3-judge panel ruled against 117 students who were identified as plaintiffs, like the Briggs case.
The Davis versus County School Board case was combined with the Brown versus Board of Education case. The Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka was initially filed in February of 1951 by 3 Topeka lawyers and assisted by the NAACP's Robert Carter and Jack Greenberg. This case featured social science testimony on behalf of the plaintiffs. As the Briggs case, that segregation had a negative effect on the psychology of black children. The testimony did not stop the Topeka judges from ruling against the plaintiffs, but the evidence from this case found its way into the wording of Supreme Court's May 17, 1954 opinion eventually.
The Bowling v. Sharp case was argued as a Fifth Amendment violation of due process because Washington, D.C. is a federal territory governed by Congress and not a state. The 14th Amendment only mentions states, so this case couldn't be argued as a violation of equal protection as the other cases were. When Gardner Bishop, a District of Columbia parent, unsuccessfully attempted to get 11 black students admitted to a newly made white junior high school, he and Consolidated Parents Group filed suit against the president of Board of Education of the District of Columbia, Melvin Sharp. Charles Hamilton Houston, the NAACP's special counsel and former dean of the Howard University School of Law, also mentored to Thurgood Marshall, took up the Bowling case. James Nabby Jr. replaced Houston as the original attorney, and by the time the case reached Supreme Court on appeal, George E. C. Hayes had been added as an attorney for the petitioners besides James Nabby Jr. According to the court, due to a decision in Plessy, the plaintiffs and others similarly situated had been deprived of the equal protection of the laws guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. Hence, segregation of America's public schools was unconstitutional.
Belton versus Gebhardt were 2 cases that were nearly identical with Bola versus Gebhardt. They both originated in Delaware in 1952. One of the parents listed as plaintiffs, Ethel Belton, brought in Claremont, while Sarah Balazs brought suit in the town of Hockessin, Delaware. Even though both of these plaintiffs brought suit due to the fact that their black children had to attend inferior schools, Balazs went through a unique situation where, being a white woman who had adopted black children, that was still subject to segregation laws of the state. Lewis Redding, Delaware's only African-American attorney at the time, argued both cases at Delaware's Court of Chancery. Jack Greenberg, NAACP's attorney, resisted Redding. Belton v. Bula Gebhardt was argued at the federal level by H. Albert Young, Delaware's Attorney General.
The Brown v. Board of Education cases caused a lot of controversy and chaos. In 1951, Farmville, Virginia, black students wanted segregation to be abolished, so much so that they went on strike to stop it. They wanted to go to a white school because of their school's poor conditioning. 450 students joined in this protest and did it for 2 weeks. They were able to get to the Supreme Court, but were not successful in stopping segregation. They weren't successful because the Supreme Court first denied them, but later on accepted their offer. However, Southerners in Virginia were angry at this change and started a huge resistance to stop it. However, Virginia started to close public schools due to a sudden stop of funding for them in 1959. In 1957 and 1958, Little Rock, Arkansas had a group of black teenagers, also known as Little Rock 9, who were trying to attend a white school. This infuriated the Southerners in Arkansas so much that they started a violent protest against these teenagers. However, President Dwight Eisenhower sent U.S. troops and took command of the National Guard, and then allowed Little Rock 9 to join the school. However, in 1958 through 1959, the governor of Arkansas closed all public high schools in Little Rock, and soon other southern states started to close public schools as well. Then in 1960, Ruby Bridges, who was a 6-year-old black girl, joined a white school in New Orleans, Louisiana. She was able to join the school because of an exam she took that decided if she could handle a white school academically. Her first day, she was escorted with her mom by 4 federal marshals. 2 marshals were in front of Ruby and her mother, and 2 were behind them. When she was being escorted, many people were screaming slurs at Ruby. This didn't affect her until Ruby saw a woman holding a black baby doll in a coffin, which then made her frightened. Ruby spent her first day in the principal's office because of all the chaos she created. However, with all the horrible things she saw at school, Ruby never missed a day in her first year and was known as the first black woman to join a white school. All this controversy and chaos was caused by all the black parents wanting their children a better school education.
After the Plessy v. Ferguson case in 1896, segregation was ruled constitutional if it was separate but equal. Unfortunately, most segregated schools were anything but equal after the ruling. It is known that in 1940, all black schools received only 45% of the funding that all white schools did, meaning that all black schools lacked basic needs such as gymnasiums, cafeterias, libraries, running water, and reliable electricity. This meant education for black Americans was very difficult and at times unbearable. Education is one of the most important things a child needs. Without it, jobs would be much harder to obtain and living becomes all the more difficult. Making black schools unequal by not providing them with their needs is beyond unconstitutional. It's inhumane. Segregation between black and white schools needed to end in order to provide equal educational opportunities for blacks and whites alike. The Brown v. Board of Education cases changed everything about the USA's education system, but caused a widespread controversy in the country that was made even worse in the South.
The 5 cases were to destroy the barrier between white and black education so that segregation would be abolished.
However, not everyone agreed with the segregation, and it created controversy that would soon end when segregation was abolished.
However, if those cases never had the light of day, we would not be the same America now.
In conclusion, these 5 cases changed the U.S. entirely by giving everyone the same education so that there is no more barrier between us.